Okay.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all back for season 5. Thank you for joining us. This is Learning with Syeyutsus. My name is Ted Cadwallader. I'm here with my co-hosts Nłeʔkepmx and Resistance, Stephanie Johnson, and we're so pleased that you could join us. We're going to start off. It's been going for 5 years now, so I just want to raise my hands to our partners, the Vancouver Island Regional Library, the UBC Press, for continuing with us on this journey. Learning with Syeyutsus is part of a School District 68 and I'm a Ladysmith project around implementing the Truth and Reconciliation's call to action number 57. So you'll see TRF 57 as our URL. Again, we'll follow the protocol as we do on Nłeʔkepmx speaking territory and turn it over to our brother Nłeʔkepmx to welcome us all.
Squel siam nasia hides up kakwasiada inamet nastlikwanas to siam Chris me tatesalnamet at anaquail hides and that's that tit with a slachan to skakip. Welcoming everybody here today, giving the highest respect to our dearly respected relative for joining us, Chris Arnett. I will start by blessing the work and sharing a song, my friends. I tap up. See him. Sweat quans eat mish do muck stem eat muck sweat. Hijk kus needs thee. Hijk I mit squeal. Hijk I mit tamoch. Eat muck stem eat na. Tan aquail eat muck squeal. Needs at tweemitet nawa lachent to size tates on amet at the quail. Die humeets aids a wittal tahol to thee mats huiam. Heichka quits twa tana tamo at the quail eat muck squeal. Heichka. Oh.
All right, Scott, my brother, as always. I know you. Hopefully, you can stay as long as possible. But I know that you're joining us on your lunch break too. So, welcome again, everybody. As I said, this is season 5. This is our kickoff session. We're very pleased to welcome our friend Chris Arnett. We were talking before everybody joined us about way back in the distant past, over 20 years ago now, when I read Chris's first book, The Terror on the Coast. I was working in Cowichan Valley, and it was a history that was well known but had never been written down, and it brought my awareness to the territory that I lived on forward. I've lived in Salish territory for over 50 years now, and when I came across that story, I went, I know that there's other stuff here that's not taught. It's not common knowledge, and Chris has carried on that path, and we're very happy that he's joined us today to talk about his most latest book, Signs of the Time, Nłeʔkepmx Resistance Through Rock Art. Chris comes to us from a long history of archaeology, anthropology, rock and roll, which is always a terrific mix, and has a great friend who was part of our first season, Wendy Wickmeyer. Wendy joined us in season 1, and Chris is carrying on that same tradition around bringing knowledge that has always been here and sharing it to the forefront, with the idea that if we know about our province and our territories and the deep history that's there, then we'll continue to look after it together and try to help us in our work around healing these relationships over the course of time. So over to you, our great friend, Chris Arnett.
Thank you so much, and thank you for Syeyutsus for inviting me to this talk. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Does that look good?
It is.
Right on. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my latest book, Signs of the Time, Nłeʔkepmx Resistance through Rock Art. And the title kind of says it all. So the subject matter of the book are the signs of the time, or signs of the time indicates imagery, signs, and we can see the signs here in this photo, the pictographic images in red ochre, and signs of the time indicates that these signs, this art was the product of a specific time period in our history. And this is explained further in the subtitle, Nłeʔkepmx Resistance through Rock Art. So what are they resisting? The whole thesis here is that rock art is an ancient practice in British Columbia, but most of the rock art we see today, and particularly the red ochre paintings, such as we see in this on the cover of this book, were produced within the last 500 years. And you know, people like to think that rock art is an ancient thing, you know, thousands of years old, but it was also produced in BC up until the early 20th century. And I found this very significant when I first started my research in this. And I've been researching this subject for about 30 years. So this book's about is the product of about 30 years of work in the Nłeʔkepmx territory. And so I found that most of this rock art visible today is found along travel corridors. We can see in the background here is an old photograph from 1897 of a location just east of Spence's Bridge, where there's a number of large boulders, some of which have rock paintings on them. And we'll talk about this site in a bit. So I was very interested in exploring the nature of this phenomena during a time when people were becoming aware of the European colonization of the Americas. And the rock art that we're going to talk about today figures very much in the resistance, and continued on into the late 20th century when areas of the Nłeʔkepmx territory were threatened by industrial logging. And the rock art played a very important role in protecting these places, as they have, as the rock art has protected people for the last 5 centuries. Oops, okay. So I hope we can all see this. This is the territory of Nłeʔkepmx. As you can see, it's a very large territory in the interior of British Columbia. You can see down on the left, the blue is the Salish Sea. And as you go up the Fraser River and you pass Spuzzum, you enter the heartland of the Nłeʔkepmx territory. And like I said, you can see it's a huge territory. It's a very diverse topography, extends down into the United States, and it's very rugged country, river valleys, steep-sided forested valleys in the eastern portions. But as you go towards the east, you get into the drier portions of the plateau. And everybody's familiar with the place Lytton, which burned down, the town anyway, the physical town in 2021. This is Nłeʔkepmx, which is the center of the Nłeʔkepmx world. It's like the Jerusalem of the world. It's the center of the world because this is where Coyote came down, or the son of Coyote went up to heaven and met with supernatural beings who gifted the son of Coyote with all kinds of information and knowledge about how to teach the people to make a living on Earth. So he came back to Earth and he landed in Lytton, and since that time, Lytton has been described as the center of the world. You can also see in this map the little black dots everywhere. These are our known rock art locations in the territory and surrounding territory. You can see they follow travel corridors, inlets, rivers, the indigenous highways of the province. And these places are found along these travel corridors. And these are the places that were chosen to be marked by people in the distant past, or not so much distant past. So rock art, the Nłeʔkepmx people, there's about 5 different divisions, 5 different dialects of the language. I think there's 5,000 to 6,000 people. And there's still a lot of knowledge in the territory because people have occupied the place continuously. So there's a lot of direct historical and cultural connection to the land by the people. And I did a lot of my work in the Stein River Valley, which you can see down in the lower left there, a beautiful valley. I think it's one of the only unlogged watersheds in the southern BC interior. And the inset on the top shows you a pictograph from the Stein River Valley showing what they look like today. It's a red ochre painting done with probably using fingers, using a red paint, which I'll talk about in a bit, and applied to the rock surfaces. And in the middle there, we see a photo of the congregation of St. David's of Stein, which was an Anglican church that stood on the west side of the Fraser River for many years. And it had a really strong, still has a strong community. And these are some elders taken with the local Anglican priest in 1960. And I had the privilege of working with some of these individuals who, told me gave me lots of information, shared lots of information about the rock art that we're going to be looking at. So a very important source are the oral traditions of living people. And these people have all had children and grandchildren. And whenever I go up to Lytton, I find that the people are still remembering what their grandparents told them. I've had little kids teach me stuff about things. So I find that really exciting because they learned it from their grandparents. And intergenerational teaching is where it's at. We're also very thankful in the BC interior to have the work of James Alexander Tate. And here he is with his wife, Lucy Antko, who's an Nłeʔkepmx woman from Spence's Bridge area. And James Tate was an exceptional man who arrived in BC from the Shetland Islands in the 1880s. And quickly, he settled in Spence's Bridge. His uncle was living there. And he quickly got into the culture. He married this woman who introduced him to the languages, and within a number of years, he became fluent in many dialects of Nłeʔkepmx and other interior languages. And he was also an exceptional writer, scholar, and he did this all in his spare time because he also had to make a living as a rancher, a farmer, and a big game hunter. So it's amazing that he did all the work he did, and it's because he met Franz Boas, who some of you may know as a great American anthropologist. So working with Boas, who edited Tate's work, we have lots of really good information, particularly about rock art. I was also privileged to work with this exceptional woman, Nłeʔkepmx scholar, Annie York of Spuzzum. And my colleague, Richard Daly, interviewed her over 3 years back in the late 80s. And he used drawings that I'd made of all of the rock arts in the Stein River Valley, all the rock art sites in the Stein River Valley. And he just sat with her, over 3 years, different times, and she offered her interpretations of the imagery and the context. Because these signs, signs have no intrinsic meaning. They only have meaning in terms of the context in which they're used. And she provided a really amazing context in that she identified a lot of the paintings as the work of prophets. So right away, it sort of gave me a direction to narrow my research. I said, the prophets. And who were these prophets? These were individuals who prophesied the coming of Europeans. And they used a number of teaching devices, methods to inform people, songs, dances, and they also marked sites that were important. And the whole idea of the prophets was change is coming. We better get ready for it. And the best way to get ready for it is to hold true and fast to the traditions, especially the origin story, knowledge of the origin stories, and the spiritual training, the vision questing, which was so essential to keeping the culture intact and grounded in the land. And they really, emphasize this. So her work was just an amazing insight from a scholar who did not attend the residential schools because she had some white ancestry. So back in the early teens, she was disqualified from going to the residential school. So as a result, she learned everything from her elders and mastered, indigenous languages, and an exceptional woman. And she's worked with all kinds of scholars. Nancy Turner, who's coming up in a few sessions, was also a student of Annie York. So we, Richard Daly and I and Annie York produced these two publications. The one on the left came out in '93, and then we had we released an updated streamlined version in 2020 that appears on the right. And both these are from Talon Books. And this was my initial foray into the rock art of the interior, but in 2008, I returned to school to the University of British Columbia, where I produced a PhD, where I really I went back and looked at all this work and added a lot of new work. I introduced archaeological techniques to the study of rock art, and that culminated in my thesis, which came out in 2016. And then it was about 500,000 words. You can go look at it on the iCircle site. And the publisher said, well, we can't publish this. So I had to scale it down. So I really had to chop it down to, be under 300 pages or whatever the book is today. So let's talk about rock art. So the earliest rock art we have is attributed to this individual, Nłeʔkepmx, who is he's the transformer. So for the Coast Salish folks, Nłeʔkepmx is Chaos, same individual or similar individual, who, these were people who at the dawn of time traveled through the landscapes of the indigenous people and basically created biodiversity. All the biodiversity we see today. Everybody was a human being in those days, and Nłeʔkepmx and Chaos transformed these people into the animals they are today, the birds they are today, and evil people or people with some issues, he turned them into rocks. But anyway, he is attributed to the origin of image making on rock. And here is an example of a site, and this is just north of the town of Yale on the Fraser River. You can see it rushing down there in the background. And these are engravings in the rock. And here's the story that James Tate recorded. So the transformers are going around, and they noticed people down there fishing in a really funny way. They were sort of holding each other by their legs and trying to grab the fish that were in the water. And so he said, okay, this is no good. So he sat down and began to think. There was a rock in front of him, and he scratched it with his fingernails. With each scratch, a thought came into the heads of the people, and they gained knowledge. And the knowledge they gained in this particular situation was the knowledge of how to fish properly. So it's just one example of many of the teachings of Nłeʔkepmx. And this place is called Syeyutsus, and it's a very important place to the Stalo and to Nłeʔkepmx. And the markings here are what archaeologists call petroglyphs, and that just means a rock carving. But the images we're going to, and these are generally older than the pictographs, the red ochre paintings that we're going to look at, but there are also red ochre paintings, there's also subject matter similar to the red ochre paintings done in the petroglyph techniques, the carving. But most of the stuff we're going to look at are paintings. And in Nłeʔkepmx, they refer to both of these techniques, petroglyphs or pictographs, as sok. one word. So that's kind of neat. In all my work, and particularly in this book, I like to foreground the language, because the language, has the indigenous toponymies, the indigenous meaning. So you don't have to rely on, these false categories of petroglyphs and pictographs. They're actually false. I've seen you could focus on one and focus on the other and miss the whole, the meaning of them completely. So anyway, Suk is a really cool word. And on the left, we can see a very simple pictograph site. You can see there's 4 vertical lines in red paint, again, around the width of a finger. And I showed it in comparison on the right. We have some Suk made by a grizzly bear on a tree in the Stein River Valley. And animals also make markings, of course. So Suk is a general term for any sort of marking. And the root of the word is ich, which comes from scratching something. So that's why I put that little picture, because it almost replicates the sound you'd make if you were scratching, So again, it sort of shows this, development of the language out of, sounds and practical things. So Suk appears on rocks, but Suk also appears on all manner of things. I mean, here on the left, we have Suk images, pictographs on the shield of a Nłeʔkepmx warrior. We see an elk jawbone with a pictographic figure on it. Another Suk, we see an apron there with pictographic images. We see face painting up in the upper right. We see a bone tube on the bottom with carvings on it from Nłeʔkepmx dating to around 1840. And you can see the pictographs, which are identical to the imagery we find on the rocks. There's no distinction between these types of markings and where they're found. And the meaning, of course, comes within the context of their use. So most of the images in the book and most of the rock art I'm concerned with was made with the red paint, pemels, which we can see here at a famous site called Syeyutsus, which is located just outside of the modern town of Princeton in the British Columbia interior. And Syeyutsus is a really important place in the Nłeʔkepmx world, because this is where Coyote finally defeated the transformers that were marching up from the coast. We saw, as earlier mentioned, Nłeʔkepmx. They were traveling through the BC interior and always running into Coyote and having confrontations and stuff. And usually Coyote won, or there was some sort of draw. But finally, when the transformers reached this part of the territory, Coyote was able to stop them completely and send them back. So I think this place got a lot of significance, mostly from the power of the paint. Like the red paint is a very important substance, as most Coast Salish people know. And on the left there, we can see the cliff face at Syeyutsus, and you can see where the quarries have been made in the rock. And on the right here, we have a close-up of a really important strata of this paint. And the paint in there is just powdery, beautiful paint. You just mix that with any kind of liquid and it'll adhere to anything. So Temel, the red ochre is an iron oxide. And when you mix it with water, it turns into basically a rock, and you can put it on the stone. And if it's not exposed to elements or spalling of the rock surface, it can be there for a long, long time. But gradually, these paintings do deteriorate as the rock surface begins to spall away from natural erosion. So what's the most important thing about tumult? Is protection. It protects you spiritually and physically. People, we always heard stories of red Indians, and there's red Maoris too. A lot of indigenous people used to just cover their whole bodies with this stuff, with oil. And so it'd give you a reddish tinge to your body, but it has health properties to it. It's an excellent mosquito repellent. I know that because I've used it myself. But anyway, so what were people trying to protect themselves from back in the day? Smallpox. So smallpox, there are debates about when smallpox first appeared in the Americas, or in this part of the Americas, but we know from the map on the right, I hope we can make this out. This is a map from what's his name? Tim Jones. It was published in American Antiquity, showing the spread of smallpox from Florida in the right over the centuries until it finally reached the West Coast. So it made a short, a steady but lethal progress. And you can see it all indicated by the different bands, shades there, and the different time periods. And the thing is about this, people on the West Coast in the BC interior, they were well aware through the prophets and from the trade routes and other things that something was on the way to British Columbia. And on the left, we find the earliest recorded smallpox epidemic, which hit this area in 1782. And this was a smallpox that came up from Mexico, came up through the Great Basin Desert, down the Columbia River. There you can see the little arrow, and it went through the Columbia and then up into Puget Sound, a little up into the Juan de Fuca, and a little up to Cape Mudge, and a little ways up the Fraser to around Spuzzum before it died out. And so, but in the wake of this epidemic, they estimate, and this comes from indigenous and scientific sources, that 9 out of 10 people perished. So you can imagine the people, in the BC interior at this time, they were well aware of what was going on elsewhere. And it was predicted by the prophets, and people began to take protective measures to stop the progress of smallpox. And smallpox was described as a chief. It was a person. So it's another aspect of indigenous, thinking and concepts. We in our culture, the Western culture, all our social relations are limited to human beings. But in the indigenous cultures, social relations include everybody and everything: rocks, trees, even smallpox. So they're all worthy of respect, and yeah, you have to deal with them. So, so in the wake of the smallpox, there were still prophets out there. This is actually a very interesting drawing that came from a book that a Stalo prophet had, and that he used to convey his teachings to people. So even after the epidemics came, there were still prophets appearing at different places throughout the 19th century, again, with the message: learn the origin stories, and especially, maintain the spiritual training. And this little drawing shows a Shwaknam Indian doctor up in the woods collecting plants and things. And you can see it's a very European, it has a European influence, the drawing, but it still draws upon a lot of features of the of earlier paintings. So when I began my work, I looked at things like pictograph distribution. And it turns out that the distribution of these red ochre pictographs, not only in the BC interior, but throughout Western North America, correspond to the distribution of the ghost dance, which was a dance that came about through the work of the prophets, as one of the measures that people were advised to undertake in order to, create solidarity and prepare for the coming changes in the world. And James Tate, he was working in 1880s, and he interviewed a lot of people who actually made rock art. And again, it showed me it was a more recent phenomena. And a lot of the people who made rock art were young people who were sent to special places that were already marked with paintings, and there they were required to hold vigil and fast and stuff, and then sometimes make their own paintings, but not all the time. So paintings were made, well, according to James Tate, who was very familiar with this rock art. He determined that the majority of images visible today were made between 1818 and 1858. So that's very recent. And just because they're recent, it doesn't mean it's any less significant than ancient rock art. To me, it's very significant and an example of indigenous resistance to the change that was coming by marking very important places. So what were they marking? And this is a central point of my book, is the place is prior. The place is older than the rock paintings. You know, so many people focus on the rock paintings. Oh, look at the cool imagery, and it is very cool imagery and beautiful and intriguing, but it's secondary to the place. The place is primary. These places are called Schreim. And here we have a highway, Highway 17, just north of Lytton. And on the left there, you can see in the bush a big rock outcrop. And these Schweim are transformed mythological beings from the Spektakel, which was the ancient time of narratives. And these are the places that the prophets marked but they didn't mark all of them. Like there's hundreds of these Schweim everywhere, rock boulders, cliffs, weird rock formations, but only certain ones were marked by these prophets, and then later by young people who were sent to these places and trained. And you see on the right, I hope you can make it out, there's a very smeared, very old image on the top, very indistinct, which is probably an older painting dating from maybe the 17th century, 18th century. And just below it, you can see more recent paintings that were probably done in the 19th century. And many of these places, in fact, the majority of them are found along these travel corridors, because this is where the invasions was expected. This is where disease, traveled along the highways, just like people did. Here's some more Schweim. These are from the Nłeʔkepmx Valley, and you can see the road here. All of these roads are ancient indigenous highways, and you can see different rock formations here and there, all marked with rock paintings. And all of these places had stories associated with them, but very few are recalled. And this is, a direct result of colonization, smallpox, which, did a real number on intergenerational teaching. I mean, if you have 9 out of 10 people dying in any community, you're going to have a big impact on the knowledge systems. And the prophets understood this. This is why they focused on places that were permanent, that had stories associated with them. And by marking them, they hoped that future generations would return to these places and learn from them. However, thanks to the great work of James Tate, we have the names of specific places and the stories, which suggests that all rock art sites had similar features. So this place is called Nłeʔkepmx Resistance. This is on the left there, you see the old Nłeʔkepmx Highway, which later became the Caribou Road, and now it's Highway 1. If you went where this is today, you wouldn't recognize it because it's been so impacted. But in the background, we have Nłeʔk. Nłeʔkepmx is the penis of Nłeʔkepmx. So the place is generally called Coyote's Penis in reference to that one rock. But there's other boulders down there. There's the vulva of Coyote's wife and the basket kettle of Coyote's wife. So where did these boulders come from? How did they originate? This is one of the places where Coyote confronted the transformer from the coast, and they had a battle of a magical kind of a duel, and trying to change each other into different things. And the transformer was trying to turn Coyote into stone, but he only turned his penis and the vulva of his wife and the basket kettle into stone. And so it was claimed as a victory by Coyote. I guess, I don't know. But it's a monument to Coyote. So here is one of the marked boulders here, Syeyutsus, the vulva of Coyote's wife. Only the reference here, haha, is something sacred and powerful. And so it was used sort of as a euphemism for vulva. And you can see on the left here some of the paintings that were recorded on this boulder by James Tate. And you can see the vulva of the Coyote's wife there in that crack. And it's sort of got red paint around it. And the images on the left were all painted on this boulder by later generations, probably vision questing youth who would visit this site because they knew it was important. It was already marked, and they went there to experience visions and such things to teach them. And this rock is no longer here. It's sort of it was a beautiful large granite boulder. It was kind of perched by the side of the road, and it may have been pushed down into the Thompson River or blown up over the years, but there's no sign of it anymore, unfortunately. Not like this site. This one, Syeyutsus Nłeʔkepmx is the basket kettle of Coyote's wife. And you see the Coyote's penis way in the distance there on the right. But this is the basket kettle, and you can see it's covered with paintings, and it's a very, very well preserved site, and wasn't destroyed by highway construction, only some rocks have fallen around it. So this site, we have this little what's important about the basket kettle of Coyote's wife? Well, here, the father of mysteries gave Mrs., who is, the transformer, gave Mrs. Coyote this wonderful kettle made of coiled basket work. It could hold water and cook food, but of such greater importance, it had the magic power to grant the wishes of its owner and to protect her from danger. This precious gift possessed another amazing property. If by chance Mrs. Coyote was injured, a sweet herb or flower or fine shade tree instantly sprung up to heal the wound. So this particular rock, Schweim, had the power of had the knowledge of plants for people that went here and hung out and marked the rock with the paint, because the paint gave access to the information from the spiritual realm. And here are the paintings, again, drawn by James Tate. James Tate made hundreds of drawings from the different sites he visited, and he did them all originally in red ink, which was kind of cool. And some of the paintings he attributed to vision questing youth. Other ones were he didn't have information on, and they're probably older paintings, and there was less information about them. Here's another place near Spence's Bridge, Nłeʔkepmx, and it's a beautiful erratic boulder way up on the sagebrush hills behind Spence's Bridge. And on the upper left, you can see a digitally enhanced image of the rock today, which brings out, it's a photograph using a special application called D-Stretch, which is an algorithm that enhances the color in a lot of these paintings on the rock. Like if you go to a rock, and you'll see some of these faded images. If you take a photograph of it with the D-Stretch, you can bring out the red ochres, and you can see them very well. And on the right, we have a drawing by James Tate of the paintings on the boulder, which he did in 1880s. And this is amazing. This is the first scientific publication of a rock art site in British Columbia. And Tate used information from an elder named Nłeʔkepmx. And, it was the first use of indigenous knowledge to interpret the drawings. He didn't sort of make it up. So like so much rock art, people go and they just make up whatever. They think, oh, it looks like this, it looks like that. But Tate didn't do that. He went there and he asked, could you tell me about these paintings? And he may have accompanied the woman to the site, and she pointed out the meaning, and he put numbers on it, and all of this is explained in the text. The little drawing down on the left there was not recorded by Tate, but recorded by a later researcher, and it shows that this painting was added after 1886 when Tate worked at this site, showing that the young women particularly, were going to this site to hold vigil and fast and to make paintings pertaining to the training of young women. So in this painting here, we see lots of little fir boughs. We see unfinished baskets and huts, isolation huts, all the things important to women, to being a woman in the Nłeʔkepmx world. And on the lower right, we see I'm holding some medicinal plants and some quartz objects that are found around the rock. A lot of these rock art sites are associated with amazing medicinal plants, which I think is another feature of these sites that is significant. Here's another boulder called Syeyutsus, which is elder sister. Again, there must have been a story about this boulder, but we don't have any idea of the story. But elder sister, it was a site used by young women, and it's a boulder that hasn't been relocated. It's somewhere around the confluence of the Nicola and the Thompson River. But fortunately, Tate made drawings, and these are the only images that appeared on the boulder. And on the left, he shows some images, and he got information from well-known elders, and they explained that these were cedar bark towels with special knots that were used by the young women in their training. So if you didn't have that information about these being cedar towels and tubes and things, you'd have no idea what these are. They kind of look like anthropomorphic figures They may allude to, you know, the spiritual humanness of these artifacts. I'm not sure. But it's great that Tate recorded this site. Here's another site that Tate visited just north of Ashcroft. It's called Spichres. It's a limestone cliff, and it has a lot of paintings on it at the base of the cliff. And you can see in the center there is my wife standing on the old trail. And you see how the trail goes directly along the base of this cliff. So anyone walking along here would pass these paintings. And the local indigenous knowledge here attributes these paintings to Shoknam, who are you know, shamans, Indian doctors, and they are also attributed to vision questing youth. And another significant thing about this site is that Tate recorded a story about the site, where involving a story about a man whose supposed friend pushes him off the cliff there and leaves him stranded on a ledge. But he is saved by a golden eagle who feeds him and raises him as her own, and then holding on to her legs, she flies away with him back to his village, where he becomes an important Shognam because he's received power from the eagle. And down in the lower right, we have an image, perhaps, of the golden eagle at the site. So once you know the stories of some of these places, and we don't have a lot of the stories, you can, you know, sometimes interpret the imagery there or suggest an interpretation. Here's a very important place, Chuchuichua. This is the southernmost post of the Nłeʔkepmx territory in the Similkameen Valley. And it's marked by this huge, huge cliff face, which is shown in the center there. It's a huge vaulting cliff surface, and the rock art is found in a little, an alcove at the base of the cliff. And I was privileged to do some work here for a number of years, excavating in the cultural deposits, and retrieved a lot of information about it. And on the right, we can see, again, some of the medicinal plants. We have yarrow and the other plant on the bottom, which I forgot, all associated with, you know, important medicinal plants. So these sites are more than just the ancient rock formations. They're also, you know, important medicinal plant gathering areas. So this site is very famous for these paintings of two men on horseback and a group of individuals who seem to be tied together by their necks with ropes and surrounded by angry-looking critters who people have interpreted as dogs. And for many, many years, people who didn't know the significance of this place interpreted this as the lost Spanish column. You know, here are the Spaniards marching with their Indian prisoners and all this stuff. But once you look into it and do some work, you find that these images were painted at 3 different times. So there's a tendency to interpret these images as a narrative, but in reality, they were done at 3 different times. So there's one image of a horseman on the left. It was probably done after 1740, and I determined that because the horse first appeared in the Similkameen Valley in the around this time period. So there's an image of an individual on a horse, and then somebody went and copied it. Another image of a man on a horse, and we know they're copies because they're both different. The one on the left has a heavier line. It's a different image. The one on the right has a thinner line, and it's less well preserved. And we see this throughout the Nłeʔkepmx territory, actually everywhere, through the Okanagan, through the Syeyutsus. All of these places you'll find instances where somebody's made an image in red ochre, and then someone's coming along later and made another copy, but that's it. You only see 2 instances of copying, which suggests to me that this was all done again in a very limited time period. And the most remarkable painting here came down through some oral history. It was painted in 1870 by a young man named Francois Tomar, who was a Similkameen native, who told a white man way back, I don't know, in the 20s, that he had made this painting, but he wouldn't divulge anything about it, which is not unusual when it comes to this art, because it was secret, this stuff. You know, they were the results of visions, and people just kept it to themselves because you know what you saw. That's all that's important. You don't have to share it with other people, and other people will know people that have the knowledge. So, done over a long time period. However, this site is very, very old. Chuchuiha, what we show here on the lower, you can see this is a profile in front of the paintings, and you're going down, you can see the layers of deposits over the years. And at the very bottom, there's a layer of Mount Mazama ash, which was created 3,500 years ago. And there are cultural deposits below that. So we know these sites are ancient, but the rock art that appears at them is more recent. And, we found red ochre in these deposits, always up in the upper sections. There's another interesting thing about Chuchuiha in the archaeology is we found a lot of plant remains like hazelnuts, which don't grow in the Nłeʔkepmx Valley, but they grow in the Fraser Valley, and it was a really important food item of Nłeʔkepmx. So it's very interesting to find it here in the Nłeʔkepmx. So here we're going to come to a site that I worked on quite a bit in the Stein River Valley. It's called Syeyutsus, and you can see the word Suk in there marking, and it's pluralized. So we got Syeyutsus markings. And so this is a big site in the Nłeʔkepmx Valley, about 4 miles up from the confluence of the Fraser, and it's marked by a huge cliff with the largest amount of paintings in the Nłeʔkepmx territory. And here is what it looks like at the base of the cliff there. And you can see there was a collapsed rock shelter there. You can see those big slabs in the foreground. Those used to be in place and fell down. And originally there was a cave there. So there's rock paintings under those, on the underside of those collapsed shelters. And there's paintings all around here. I think I recorded about 192 different painting events. And you can just see on the left there, if you go to the left, the Stein River Valley. So this is very close to the Stein. And I recorded the site by just documenting every single image you could see. So if you go there today and just kind of look, you don't see much here because you really have to examine these sites in detail and use some of this image enhancing information. And so I'm going to share some of it with you now. So here's what the rock looks like today. This one's, or one image anyway. Oh, it didn't transition as well as I liked, but that's okay. You can see the D stretch brings it right out. And it's a large image. This is one of the largest images in the BC interior. It's about 1 meter by 1 meter. And it's way up on the high on the cliff face of this cliff at Syeyutsus. Here's another rock. Again, you can't see much there at all. But when you use the enhanced imagery, you can see layers of images painted probably over the last few centuries, one on top of the other. And here is another image from Syeyutsus. And on the right, you can just barely make out 2 images. There's sort of a solar rayed circle there at the top, and another figure of a grizzly bear arm. And the solar image on the top actually overlaps the grizzly bear arm. So there's 2 episodes here. It looks like a single image, but there's 2 separate images there. And this shot gives you an idea of what these paintings look like if you were to visit the site today. And here, for example, is another group of images from the Stein site. And with the digital enhancement, you get a much better idea of the images. And here again, we have this replication. The image on the left, which is a lot more elaborate, and you can even see a fringed shirt on that figure. It shows an owl figure, some sort of hunting figure with game animals under its arm. Someone painted the image on the left, and then I don't know, who knows how many years later, someone copied that exact image. And these are the only ones you'll find. You won't find 3 of these images, 4, only 2. Same here. There's 2 human figures. One on the left, you can see, it looks like 2 warriors. This is how they were interpreted, holding a shield and a bow and arrow. The warrior on the right there, you can see the string on his bow, and he's done in a finer kind of line, whereas the figure on the left is done with a thicker line. The paint's better preserved, which suggests that it was done later in time. Let me get it's not progressing here, just a sec. That's better. Here we have some more images. You can see the more recent ones in the more vibrant color. and overlaying earlier paintings. So it's very important. This gives you, you know, a really good sense of time in these images. So here's some important work we were doing. We did archaeological excavations at this site. And over here on the left, you can see some very faded images on a giant block of rock, and we excavated underneath it. And on the right, I determined some of the images by de-stretch, so we can see the false color shows you the different episodes of painting that you can tease out using the digital technology. And here's the rock we were working under, and it's a giant slab that must weigh about 2 tons. So we were a little nervous as we were doing these excavations. Here's the excavation we did. You can see they weren't very deep. We excavated down to the sterile soil, so the actual excavations were only about 20 centimeters deep, but composed of very fine layers of material. We used a 3-millimeter screen to screen out the soil to gather everything we could. And you can see here we've excavated down to sterile. And in the foreground, you can see whatever that gizmo is, lying in an old hearth that somebody built directly under the images. So what did we find in these deposits? We found, well, traces of paint. We found ochre fragments that were used, and we also found a little chunk of Laris occidentalis, which is pitch from the tamarack tree, which was known to be an important ingredient in making the red paint. We also found a lot of little artifacts, dentalium shells, and this really interesting artifacts, fragments of Patinopecten carinus, which is the scallop shell. The scallop shell on the right was not from a rock art site. It was found from a grave years ago in the BC interior. And but it shows that there were ceremonies here in the 19th century using rattles, which suggests to me possibly Shuai ceremonials at some of these sites. And so, of course, when they're shaking the rattles and their rattles, bits break off, and we have found fragments of these in the Stein and in a neighboring valley of Kaik and in the Nłeʔkepmx Valley. We also find a lot of faunal materials, floral materials, you know, berries, bits of stuff that people were eating, but not a lot, because people went here and they didn't eat. These places weren't, you know, camping places. They were places where people just hung out and fasted and maybe ate small amounts of food. We also found, so here in 12 centimeters, and that's not a very deep deposit, all of these traces of a minute debitage made from the manufacture of small little tools that were probably used for bloodletting. And you can see up in the upper levels, we find bits of worked glass integrated into the lithic technology of the Nłeʔkepmx, because when glass was introduced, people quickly realized the potential of it as a tool. And most important here are the radiocarbon dates, or not most important, but another important thing. At the Stein site, we got 4 radiocarbon dates from that little 20 centimeter deposit. The oldest ones dated maybe to 1562. So again, it shows you that the work that people were using this site, making the paintings there, going through these activities, rituals over a very short time period. So I got involved in this study because the Stein wilderness was in danger of immediate destruction. And here's some of the information from the day. And I was interested in rock art in Burrard Inlet, doing a lot of work there. And I was contacted by the Western Canada Wilderness Committee and the Lytton Indian Band, who asked me if I would work with them to educate people about the significance of the rock art sites at the place. Because the proposed logging road that was going to be built in the Stein River Valley would have impacted like half the sites in the valley, pretty much destroyed them. This site was saved and was out of danger. It was called the Prayer Rock, very important site at the entrance of the valley. Everybody knows about this place. There's stories about it. You'll have to read the book to get, I know we're running out of time. You'll have to read the book to learn more about this site. But here I am lying in an alcove where people used to lay and have their visions. And this particular rock had a lot of prophecies about the railways. And there were 3 sort of red horizontal lines there. And an elder told a friend of mine that The first line was the CPR. The second line was the CN. When the third line's built, it'll be the end of the world. And I always thought in my mind, the third line was going through the sign. So all of this work became very important, I think, in protecting the Stein. The images actually fulfilled their original function to protect this place, because on the left, you can see the site of Syeyutsus. It's a cliff along the river. The proposed logging railway or proposed logging road would have gone along the top of that cliff. So all of the rock, everything would have crumbled down and destroyed this site completely. The largest rock art site in the BC interior. So in summary, when you look at rock art, wherever it is, in the Nłeʔkepmx territory, wherever, look at the rock and then look at the art. Often, if you look at these sites, you'll see they resemble physical features of animals and people. You got to look at that first, and then look how the art is used on that particular site. And that's the end. Thank you. There's a lot more I could have talked about, but read the book and learn more.
Yeah. Thanks so
Thank you.
much,
So
Chris.
if we have time, you know, we can have some questions.
Yeah. I I love the book, Chris. I loved how you put the voice of Annie York in particular in there, so that I could hear her as I was reading it. The valley itself and all of the places I've crossed Nłeʔkepmx territory also come through with great love and respect as you wrote it. I know that we've got rock art across this province in different ways and shapes and forms. There was one in front of my house where I grew up in Syeyutsus in Fort Rupert that we used to see all the time as kids. And so thank you for sharing that knowledge. And when you started off your story with us today, you talked about, and I don't know the Nłeʔkepmx word, but you talked about cows making a scratch in the stone, and each scratch put a thought into the heads of the people so that they could live in a better way on that territory. And then I was thinking about this all the way through too, with like all of our authors, you've put a scratch in the rock and a thought into our heads so that we can walk better on this path that we're on. The resistance to change and resistance through rock art came through too, and that message to stay strong in those foundational teachings is going to protect us, because change is going to come, but that's what will help us through on the other side. Also, I wanted again, as we in this circle, we started off in thanking our colleagues at the Vancouver Island Regional Libraries and UBC Press on connecting us with people like you who can share our knowledge and again help us to walk better on this path that we're on. So I'd like to, on behalf of my wonderful pal Stephanie, Syeyutsus, and Lawrence, who started us off here in a really good way, I'll thank everybody for joining us today. And again, like Chris says, go and read this book. You can get it off our website with UBC Press colleagues offering 20% off on it too. A beautiful book. Thanks so much, everyone.
Ted.